So a question for you. Have you ever felt moved to cry, but you just didn't know why? Recently, I had some friends of mine tell me about the Disney sing-along that was going to be on TV the other week. And the kid in me and loving Disney, loving to sing and stuff like that, I had to watch it and I had to sing along. At the end, most of the original cast from the High School Musicals rejoined to sing "We're All in This Together." I was a bit surprised at myself because I cried. And I'm not really an easy crier. And I questioned myself, what was up with that? Later that evening, our daughter Emily and I were texting back and forth, and it was just like, okay, well, maybe just my sadness kind of just came out of my eyes in the form of tears, in the sense that just being a part of this time during this pandemic, and also that High School Musical movies were such a thing for Emily back in the day. And Disney being a time of our family and our connectedness at times. And so maybe it's just a little bit of that kind of stuff. But I just really had a sense in my spirit that it was more than that. So I asked the Lord to show me. I've titled today's message, "We're All in This Together." Because we're all in this together as followers of Christ, trying to live lives that are out of this world. If there's any time we could say that it's now. It's now that, we are living so out of our elements, and we're living in this together. I mean, I know for just not too long ago, we would often encourage one another, be aware that someone else is going through something, even if you can't see it. You know that someone else is going through something. But now the reality is all of us worldwide are going through something. And it's called a pandemic. And we're all having different responses to it, and we're all in different situations. And we have our leaders all trying to figure out what the heck to do and everything like that. And it's just such a crazy, as quoted often, unprecedented time. So this total new experience, that, we're being exposed to things that we didn't even know existed, and ways that we're feeling we didn't even know might have existed inside of us. So the beauty is there is God, and there is God in His Word to help us navigate through these unprecedented times, okay? And not only through this time, but for good. And as we're continuing this series of Pain and Glory, the teachings from the books of Peter, in which we thank Pastor Jeff and Dre for starting us off. Last week, Pastor Jeff shared about the church leaving the building and getting out of its four walls to go and live out the reality that we can collectively see the value of interdependence as the body of Christ out in this world. So Peter, the author of this letter, this book, we know is one of the disciples that was married. In the Gospels, it speaks of Peter and his mother-in-law in his home where Jesus went to visit, and he healed her. And in that part of, in this part of his message, he addresses with us about wives and husbands and the family of God, about the ways of a household, as well as in the home and of the church. Women at this time were seen as second-rate citizens without any rights, only those that were under their husbands. The beauty that Peter is speaking specifically to wives in this part is something to be recognized. Peter would have witnessed Jesus showing a lot of examples of how women were valuable to Jesus through the multiple encounters that he had with them. Let's take a look at 1 Peter 3, 1-8. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from the outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold clothing or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. And then finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. So wives, in the same way, okay, what does that mean? Okay, is the same way as what? Kind of gotta roll back like a This Is Us episode and see what's happening before this to see what that in the same way means. Okay, and we find it very close by in 1 Peter verses 2:21 to 24. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds, we are healed. See, the thing is here, Jesus is the picture of submission. And now that word, that can be a dirty word sometimes. It can be seen as weak and demeaning. But what we have to realize here is that that submission was shown to us and for us through the example that Jesus lived in relationship to his Father, to our Heavenly Father. He submitted himself to him and his ways. So as wives, God is the one who has orchestrated this, called us to, in the same way as the example I've already given you, to submit to your husbands. And the reality is, back in Genesis, we read the fall of man. And at that time, Genesis 3 speaks of the order that God was ordaining and commanding of how a home was to be. And God gave this command to Eve, that her desire would be for her husband and he would rule over her. And as we know, though, many things can get really distorted over time. But the submission that Peter is speaking about here, it was to have a purpose. And that purpose here is that their husbands would be won over without words by their behavior. The women of this day were obliged to follow the faith of their husbands. It's said that women may have had a side cult or something, but their family collectively, they were to follow what the husbands did. So these women who were hearing this message of Peter would have been ones that were choosing to follow Jesus and his ways. These women, Peter was telling them and giving them an authority in a sense that, you know what? As you submit to Christ, to the example of Christ, to what you've seen and known that he has done for you, and you submit to your husbands by living that out, not just using your words, but living it out, because practice is much more powerful than words, okay? That their husbands could turn around, could come to know this Jesus. These these women were given a power and authority to be an example to their husbands. And that was something that was totally new and different for that time. Because, like I said, it has been the oppression and the authority of man was just over rather than joined. So I want to say here, that was an invitation that Peter was given the women, the wives. I just want to share with you, first few years of our marriage, Jeff's approach was as follows. I am not going to let any woman, especially not my wife, tell me anything. He was a fighter. He was quick to anger, his way or the highway. He was raised as a Christian, and he would have told you that he was a Christian. And then there was me, the sensitive one from a broken home, and I was full of fear and abandonment, a girl who just wanted to be happy and have fun. I believe in the importance of owning our own stuff. So I want to say here that I began to read books on how to be a godly wife, seeking the Lord, reading his word. And through much stumbling, I knew I had to trust God with my husband and with our marriage. So I chose to, through prayer, making attempts to love and care for him, even if I didn't feel that way from him. And over time, through lots of tears and prayers and journaling, the Lord was gracious to reveal some beauty from the heartache that was walked. So I would encourage you wives today that you know what, because of Christ, he has given you a power and an authority to be an example, to be an influence, to make a difference in your husband's lives. And when it comes to following him, I pray that you're not just words, but that you can live that out and show by example. And it will be amazing just what God can do in and through you and the ways that he will reveal himself as we trust him with our husbands and our marriages. So the next few verses for me are a couple of my favorite ones, and I think it's probably due to my personality and I enjoy fashion and such. But verses 3 and 4 read, "Your beauty should not come from your outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great value in God's eyesight." The truth is, appearance can attract, but the inner being can captivate. In my youth, my thinking, I'm not going to lie, what really mattered was how high the hair was. The bigger, the better. The tighter the clothes, the better. The more skin showing, the better. It was all about how I looked, and just that was what I spent most of my days in my youth on. So all the hours of time and the money spent shopping and prepping. And I remember there was one day that my nan came in my room, and I was sitting there, doing my normal routine, sitting on my floor, my floor length mirror. And she said to me, "Girl, if you were to spend as much time on your inside as you do your outside, it'd be a pretty amazing thing." That woman was a wise woman. And the thing that was really cool about her was that she knew what was valuable, but she also knew how to present herself as a lady. So I want to just let us know that the heart matters, okay? The heart matters. Yes, it might be true that external can attract, and it's the internal that maybe we're sometimes afraid to let others know about, and sometimes we're ashamed of or embarrassed of or whatever it might be, so then it's easier to show the outward rather than show the inward. But I want to let us know that God sees that as valuable, okay? 1 Samuel 16:7 says, "Don't consider his appearance or his height, for I've rejected him." The Lord doesn't look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So I think the question we have to ask here is, am I more concerned with what God's view is as being a wife, as being a woman, or am I more concerned about others' view? that hidden person of the heart, when we are choosing to live and embrace from God's view, that hidden person can be calm and self-controlled. She can be not over anxious, but serene and spiritually mature, because she has seen the example of Jesus, and that he didn't back himself up with force and words. Instead, he entrusted himself to the Heavenly Father. And when we think of how this heart matters, the intricate design of the way that God has designed us with mind, body, spirit, they are also intricately designed. And the reality is our views of ourselves are going to come out, and the pressures around us are going to affect us. And our physical hearts, okay? Our physical hearts. In my 40s now, I know in our family we've had heart disease, and I'm learning more and more about just trying to take care of myself and trying to manage my stress, because the reality is I don't want to go too soon, because I didn't choose to do what I could do in order to be healthy for myself and my family and my loved ones. So a verse that I often reflect upon is, Proverbs 4:23, that above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And the beauty of what we see that Peter is saying to us here is that, he's not saying that we can't have a voice as a woman, as a wife. It is important for us to have a voice, to not be doormats, and to not be sinned against or harmed mentally, emotionally, or physically. But the reality that these 4 passages, he's telling us the importance of the inside and the outside, because it's what God sees and it's what others see. So where are we? Where are you? What's going on inside that's coming out? What's inside that maybe you're not letting come out? Are we taking the time to pause before we act? What may our husbands or our children or our families, our friends, our church be seeing? It's just some things to think about. Verses 5 and 6. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Peter shares with how the holy women of the past, how they put their hope in God, okay? The call to adapting themselves to their husbands. There isn't information really given about Peter and his wife in specific, but recently we've gotten to watch the Chosen series, and the way that she was depicted in that series, I was like, I could relate. Thinking about her being married to a man who was just off the cuff and edge, and at one point he's just so quick to defend and quick to protect, and cut off an ear of a soldier who was coming after Jesus, and I could relate being married in that situation, and I loved how they depicted her in that series. That there was a scene where Peter is going on and everything, and she's realizing that his choices and just what's going on, even though she doesn't know fully, she knows that something is not right. And she had been trying to be an example, and she had been trying to just wait, and she'd been lifting him up to the Lord, but and she was using her words at this point to try and guide him, but to no avail. And what she says at the end of that scene was, let the Lord deal with you as he will. And sometimes that's how it's got to be. Sometimes, wives, there is nothing more and nothing less that we can do. We just got to wait and trust, okay? Sometimes our efforts can be fruitless. but sometimes those efforts can be fruitful. And if we're only relying upon ourselves and our ways of doing things or seeking out our friends or the worldly advice and stuff, there's going to be some crazy things that can come out of that. I tell you, I told you guys a little bit about how Jeff and I's marriage was for a while. And I remember reading that, do not be close with an angry man. And I was like, okay, well, what do I do if that man is my husband? So the reality is we can totally go off of our own interpretation of things and follow through with ways that are not God's ways. So looking at this example that Peter gives of Sarah and Abraham, I mean, this was a couple who God promised nations of children who had children not until their late old age after an experience of choosing their way over God's way. And then there was a time that Abraham says, okay, we need to go because God said we need to go, but I don't know where we're going. And then also too, you know what? Once we get to this next town, I want you to tell the people there that you're my sister. So we'll kind of protect ourselves and kind of be under the radar of things. What? Okay, so doing what is right. Doing what is right and without any fear. Sarah, in that situation, she had to be respectful toward him, not giving in to the intimidation, nor allowing herself to sin. But she had to trust herself to God because the reality was her husband wasn't really making the best of choices at that time. So here we're seeing that it is not being inferior. It is not inferior, but out of respect for the responsibilities that are entrusted to them and that they're human. They're dust just like we are. And we get to partner with them. And the beauty is that through our influence and through our example, they can be won over to Christ. So maybe next time, they might not make that same kind of choice. So the question we have to ask ourselves here is, where am I putting my hope? Am I putting it in God? Or am I putting it in my job, in my spouse, in my family, in my image, in my church? And if I'm a follower of God and know that He supplies all my needs, am I believing that? Am I living in that truth? So now, husbands, I'm not going to leave you guys out. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. In the same way as well, referring to 1 Peter 2, 21-24, where he states his reactions and the ways that he was submissive. Okay? So it is a partnering. It is a joining together. Now the reality is, okay, I know, God's calling you as a husband to treat your wife with respect as the weaker partner. And this not meaning spiritually, emotionally, mentally, but typically physically, you guys are stronger. How many times can you think of that you were asked to, loosen up that tight lid or lift up that, something off of a shelf or bring in that heavier bag from in the car that just gets filled with groceries? That's the type of weaker partner that he's talking about. That there is help that you give to your spouse as well. I read a commentator put it this way, that you as the husband, you're the iron skillet, and your wife is precious china. This not meaning that your wife is a little delicate flower, easily crushed. But we know that the reality is an iron skillet could quickly smash a delicate china cup. And unfortunately, in some relationships, that is what happens. And sometimes, you know what, I'm not going to lie, that I know that sometimes that's not only in the way that a husband treats a wife, but it also is in the way that a wife can treat a husband. But as we're speaking to husbands here, okay, The reality is that having our spirits crushed or being physically harmed is not acceptable. And if that is a way that you've been or have been or is, I encourage you to seek and get some help for healing. The example of this precious china reminds me of my Nana. Growing up, she had a precious set of china dishes and cups and everything that we used to use for family gatherings. And at the end of each of those meals, she would always, have all of us take our dishes out to the kitchen, but we could not stack them. They could not be stacked. They had to be all separately placed on the counter and washed one at a time. There was no way they were going through the dishwasher, okay, because they were delicate. They were precious to her, and she enjoyed them and enjoyed using them with all of us. So she put a special treasure upon them, and she protected them. And that's what God is saying here. That it's not meaning that your wives are, just totally delicate little fluffy things, but that they are to be treasured. And the truth is, you guys are too. We are all treasured in God's eyes. Both husband and wife, they've received the gift of life in Jesus, and they are equal heirs in his name. So for men and women in the family of God, we're brothers and sisters, which I know might seem kind of weird, but that's the truth. In the family of God, we're brothers and sisters. The additional part is the beauty of a partnership, to have a helpmeet each and every day of our lives. And grow in understanding, grow in faith. I mean, that's a true treasure that can happen in our marriages. I want to ask you guys, I encourage you to ask yourselves, where do I value my wife? Then even go a step further and ask God to show you how to love like he does. And I encourage you to put into action. Maybe it's asking yourself as well, where do I see how she values me? Then let her know. If there's anything I've heard from wives throughout the years, is that they love to hear from their guys, and they wish they would talk a little bit more at times. So another message for you guys, for guys that are out there too, if you're not married, how are you choosing to treat women? I encourage you to think about that. What is your view? What's your perspective? And what you're choosing to act out? And if you're single and looking to be married, are you seeking to be a man who is after God's heart, who God would be honored to be represented by, because you're choosing him in his ways? These passages, and up until this point, are all speaking of, how a household is run, with a husband and a wife, and maybe that's not your setup. I realize that maybe some of you are coming from broken homes. Maybe some of you are the dads that are raising the kids. Maybe some moms are. And maybe some of you are today don't even have anybody else living with you in your house. And others, it's you and the pets. But now we're going to move on to see how God says that as the family of God and his church, this is how we can be. Finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble in the family of God, okay? We're creating homes here for the purpose of God's glory, living this out in our relationships, whether it's the relationships in our homes and in how we're out in public and in our works, or whether it's the relationships in our church and how we're choosing to get along. This verse consists of attitudes for the church to be like-minded with the focus of Christ as our example and his kingdom to expand. Be sympathetic, joining one another in their joys and pains, to love which is a practice, not a feeling. And to be compassionate, keeping in mind the different needs and responsibilities we each have in this life, and humbling ourselves and putting others ahead of us. So how can we do all of this? I know a lot of this is easier said than done, okay? But we can know our example. Know your example. 1 Peter 2:21, again, to this being called because Christ suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow his footsteps. Okay, we have the example of Christ. Focus, keep on coming back to that. Our feelings are going to ebb and flow. Our opinions are going to go in and out. Others' opinions are going to go in and out. Others' feelings are going to go in and out. Everybody's going to be all flowing in their own way. But when we have a united focus, okay, of who our example is, above all, and choosing him and allowing him and his spirit to lead us and guide us as his family, amazing things can happen. I read a little equation this week, that says trust grows with intimacy and dependence. So being honest with the Lord, getting to know his ways and relying upon him for our strength, being honest with ourselves and others plays a big part in personal trust as well as trusting others. Proverbs and Psalms are such gifts to me. And I would have to say, Proverbs 22:17 to 19 says, pay attention and turn your ear to the sayings of the wise. Apply your heart to what I teach. For it is pleasing when you keep them in your heart and have them ready on your lips so that your trust may be in the Lord. So our trust grows with that intimacy and independence with him, hiding that in our hearts and then allowing that to come out to the world. So staying focused is another way that we can do that. Recently, many of you know that I had some neck spasms and I ended up missing a few days of work and I took a lot of time to just rest and recoup. But it was just absolutely crazy. I didn't know really what was going on. I just knew that I had this really, really sore neck and it was draining my energy and I felt so out of it. And the one morning I just woke up and it was so excruciating that I woke up and I just kind of looked. I couldn't even turn my head at all. All I could do was turn my eyes, but I couldn't turn my head, and trying to lift it up off of the pillow, it was excruciating all over again. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on. I just got up and contacted my doc, and I work for a chiropractor, so I was able to just check in with him. And he said, "Look, I think you need to come on in and see me again, and let's look this out," because they had already taken a look at me, and there was all these things. So anyway, I go in, and he tells me, "Okay, you need to go. You need to go to urgent care and get some X-rays and get some help." So I was able to do that, and long story short, over another week of time, I started to feel much better. But during that time, there was so much that God was teaching me through all of that. And Deuteronomy 5:32 to 33 was one of them. Be careful to do what is right, that the Lord your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to your right or to your left, but walk in obedience to all that the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land you will possess. And another one was, do not turn to your right or your left, but keep your foot from evil, in Proverbs 4:27. So keeping my foot from evil, okay? What can that look like? I can filter out pollution in my life, okay? In this world, there is a ton of things that vie for our attention. It can become confusing which way to follow, what to listen to, who to listen to. This is a simple and complex way that the evil one can cause us to take walks with him. ones that cause us to go astray and wander. And the truth is, we're prone to that. When we see things, may we not just go on autopilot. Take these things in, but pause, pray, and check it out before we take a step. Okay? The Book of Boundaries, maybe some of you are familiar with, by the Townsend and Cloud team. And I read that a couple of years ago, and that was a very influential book in my life to help me to sort things out and stuff and to learn what healthy boundaries looked like. So in that book, they bring to light what our church stands for, that that the thief only came to steal and to kill and destroy, but I have come to give fullness of life because there is hope in Jesus. But that full passage says, from 9 and 10, of John 9 and 10, it says, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture, which means that they will have freedom, because the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. And I have come that they may have life and have it in the full. The beauty in the Book of Boundaries, they talked about the sheep pen that would, be kind of set up like this and that, and then a wall back here. And in the gate that would be here, the shepherd would lay while all the sheep were inside the pen for the evening. And so there was no way a sheep was going to be getting out or in without the shepherd knowing. And that's what Boundaries is talking about, being careful to filter out the things that are in our lives, the things that need to stay in and the things that need to go out, and filtering that all through Christ, allowing him to work in and through us and to sort those things out. So that's what I mean by filtering out the pollution that's in our lives. Stopping and thinking about, what are we choosing to watch? What are we choosing to read? What are we choosing to buy? Where are we choosing to go? Just stopping to think about all those things and pausing and asking God his view on it. Finally, I want to just encourage us to choose to influence. I hear it a lot of times that, it was no big deal, they shouldn't be watching me or following me anyway, and whatnot. So I kind of thought to myself, it's not only choosing to influence, but it's accepting that we do influence. And Deuteronomy 4:9 says, only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. This is speaking of those spiritual things, those things, the ways that God has made himself real in our lives. Don't grow weary of sharing that with our kids. Don't grow weary of only relying upon the things that we might have learned all the way back in our youth or in our childhood, and not embracing the reality that there are things that we can learn and grow in now. God is always moving and shaking and always ready to show himself. So I pray in the name of Jesus that we would choose and accept the influence that we have, especially with others watching. Because the reality is that more is caught than taught, okay? People are always watching us, whether it be in our homes or in our work, out in our communities. We are not responsible for their view of us, but we are responsible for the view that we give them. As moms, what example are we showing to our kids about how we treat our husbands, about the things that we talk about at home, about how we even view ourselves at times? What are we teaching them? Just pausing to think about that and realizing that our ways are going to influence those others around us. So who is going to be our source? So what example am I willing to give? And am I sharing and showing Jesus wherever I am? Am I representing his family well? These are just things for us to think about. So as we wrap things up today, in this game of life, we're never alone, even when we might feel that way. There are many relationships to consider here. The one we've with Jesus, others we live with, we worship with, we work with, we play with, or just to mention a few. We are the common denominators in all of them. And there is no I in team, but there is a me. And who am I going to be in that team? There may be some of you listening today that have been a part of God's family, but walked away from the church for various reasons. If you've been hurt, I extend to you my sorrow. I was once there too. The reality is, people will let us down, but the Lord invites us to hope in Him, okay? Because His family is forgiven but far from perfect. Maybe you've never even wanted to be a part of His family, but today there's a tug on your heart. And He tells us in John 3:16, He so loved the world that He gave us His one and only Son, so that we didn't have to die to our sins, but could walk in a newness of life. And if that's where you are today, a simple prayer of Jesus, I know that I am a sinner and I am in need of your forgiveness. Please teach me your ways. So if that is something you're led to pray for the first time today, I pray that you will, I hope and pray you'll let us know here at 1010 or let somebody in your world know, so then you can take the next steps of growing in that newfound faith. So as God's people, are we keeping to ourselves? Are we keeping inside our four walls? Or are we making efforts to be different in the world around us? If He has set us apart, are we choosing to stand out or blend in? In a world that offers instant gratification, are we willing to pause and embrace what is best? Just imagine with me what our families, our friendships, our marriages, our churches, our schools, our businesses could look like if we chose to seek, know, and follow our awesome God, trusting Him to work in and through us to show a difference of a way of life that is out of this world. I encourage us today, go team, because we're in this together, and there is hope in Jesus Christ.